Hello, Hidden Gems. It's time for another Hidden Hour. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for your patience. Can everybody hear us? That's the first thing we always check because sometimes we're surprised. And can everyone hear us?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, nice and
Okay.
loud actually today. So,
All right.
hello, everyone. So good to see all of you today. We have Wow. Let me just say what a day it's been. What a 2 day it's been. Thank you to a team of people who helped watch our son, team members who helped us research all of the evidence that just poured out yesterday on the Ruby Franke Jody Hildebrandt case. A special thanks to our gem, Shelley, who helped us go through everything today. Genuinely helped. Big show. And just so everybody knows, why are we seeing so much evidence in the Ruby Franke Jody Hildebrandt 8-passenger case? It is because when they were sentenced on the 21st of February, they stated that all of the FOIA documents and all of the evidence would be unsealed 30 days post their sentencing. And that was yesterday. So it came down, and we are going through everything, recordings, interviews, everything. John has been working in his office all day. And John, I will just actually honestly let you take it away. We have a bunch of videos to share. You direct me and tell me where you would like to start.
Let's start with the Kevin Franke audio file. I think that's the most interesting. I think we're gonna go through a lot of the Kevin Franke audio file because I really think it shows us the process of, to some degree, of indoctrination into a cult. And it really, I think that'll really take us into Jody Hildebrandt's psyche and what she's up to and how she's kind of maneuvering this situation. So the Kevin Franke audio is really important. The other thing I think that's important is that there's, this is really like Daybell, like the Daybell case. This is really a story about belief to a large degree, the psychology of belief. And so we'll be talking about belief systems and how beliefs affect us and behavior, and we'll see some of the beliefs that are in play here. And some of those beliefs, as you know, Lauren, many of those beliefs have similarities to Daybell, which, fortunately in this case, there were no fatalities. So we can be grateful for that. But I feel like it feels like this case was ominous in the sense that it was on the cusp.
Absolutely.
It was right on the cusp of fatal actions between Jody and Ruby. So, and we'll talk about that too.
Yes. Let me pull this up then.
And you're saying something like, is it like a satchel looking leather bit, or is it more like a binder?
No, it's like, I don't even know what to call it. But
it's flat.
It's, well, yeah, so you
just like
see
a shorter, because we do have Ruby's journal, which is from those dates that you mentioned.
these things are going to be so, she wouldn't write, the stuff she wrote in the pen paper, she would not write in her journal. The stuff she wrote in the pen papers was not intended to be read by anybody until God would decree them to be written as scripture for the whole world to read.
Okay.
I believe that's what we have.
Okay.
Because you're saying the pen would be different, correct? It's like a...
Well, it was just in a thing called the pen papers. So it was, and that's how Ruby referred to those papers. Yeah. So it described all of the visions and trances and everything that Jody and Ruby went into.
How thick would you say it was?
It was like 3 inches thick or so. And there were hundreds of pages of written documents that Ruby had. And that was given to Jody in 2022 when she left and returned to her home in January. So
this is similar.
Yeah, like it would look like that.
Okay.
Yep. we're good.
Okay.
So this is the beginning of the Kevin Franke interview. So this would be the second interview with police, by the way. The second interview was audio only. The first interview was video. So if people are going through this evidence, the interview you want to look for here is the audio version. And this was recorded later. So the original interview Kevin Franke gave to police occurred immediately after the arrests, and then this interview occurs later. But 2 minutes into this interview, you have Kevin already talking about this thing called the pen papers. And this is amazing to me. I mean, I when I heard this and I heard this description of it, of course, I went right to Daybell again, in the sense that the pen papers are something that Ruby, first of all, this is important, that Ruby is the one recording the pen papers. So Rudy is the one responsible for these papers. Jody's involved in them, and some of it involves recording Jody's visions and trances, apparently both Ruby and Jody's visions and trances. But they're equally responsible. But Jody is the one actually recording, and Kevin says that Ruby believes that these will become scripture.
Yes.
And they're just waiting for the word of God to enter these into, I don't know if that means LDS, scripture. I'm not quite sure how they mean that. But obviously, this is fascinating to me because, number one, it suggests that Ruby is very culpable. You know, the belief has been, our belief has been, and I've stated that I felt like Jody was sort of the ringleader and leading the charge. And now here you have Kevin saying essentially that Jody is equally involved, that Jody is writing these pen papers, that Jody has, in some ways, she's leading in writing these papers, recording them. She thinks they're going to be scripture. So you have, this is not, and again, getting back to Daybell, this sort of reminds me of the Daybell situation where Chad is definitely in charge, in my opinion, and Lori goes along, but Lori has a tremendous amount of influence. And so I think you see something similar here. I think Jody's in charge of this cult, but Ruby has a huge amount of influence. And you see this here with the pen papers. By the way, nobody's clear where these pen papers are. It's not clear if the police confiscated these during their search. It's not clear if somebody else took them from the home. I don't think we've quite located these pen papers, but I would sure love to see the pen papers because I think there's a lot of significance there. And if I'm assessing, so one big question here is, you know, they've taken plea deals. They have, okay, they've taken plea deals. They've been sentenced, but that we don't know the amount of sentencing. So this is still in process. This still has to go to the parole board. But what's important here is that when these sentences are given, Lauren, I'm sorry, there's like your mic, I think, is making a little bit of noise. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me. Okay. So, okay, I'll keep going. Can you just let me know when you're back on? So what's important here is I think in trying to determine the amount of time to provide for the sentencing, it's going to be really important to determine risk. And a big part of determining risk will be related to this issue of belief and culpability. And so here with these pen papers, we see that Ruby, who was clearly supposedly the most remorseful during her sentencing, we see that Ruby plays an equally large role in this relationship and in this belief system, and probably in the crimes being committed. So I think it's important for the parole board to look at this interview very closely if they haven't already. And I don't know, I assume that the prosecutors clearly went through this evidence very carefully, but Kevin is giving us a lot of really interesting information here about what's going on, and he's giving us kind of an inside look, not only based on his own experience, but what he knows of their relationship and how it unfolds and who believes what and who's responsible for what. And I think this is an important moment, because
Yes.
we learn that these pen papers are crafted by Ruby. They contain the visions of Jody and Ruby both. So this isn't just in the sentencing hearing. It appeared, for people not familiar with the case, it would have appeared that Ruby was completely the victim of Jody. She was brainwashed by Jody. She went along with Jody. And now that Jody was in prison, that Ruby was free, she's her own person. She thanked everybody in the courtroom, including the detectives who arrested her, right? She was giving like an Oscar-worthy type speech. And the implication was that Ruby was a peer victim of Jody's, that she wasn't really culpable. And clearly, when you look at this evidence, we're starting to see that she is culpable, that her beliefs around the treatment of children and these crimes, it runs deep. And this is problematic to me, because after the sentencing, the prosecutor held a press conference and basically said, "Isn't Ruby great? She seems so remorseful. Clearly she's going to do less time." I think that needs to be reevaluated.
Well said. Thank you. And I can hear you again. There was a moment you probably noticed where I couldn't hear anything.
Okay.
Maybe
Are
you
you
didn't.
back?
I'm back. Maybe you
Okay.
didn't notice. Maybe I should have said anything.
I did notice, because I try to play off your nonverbals.
You could tell.
Sometimes,
No,
sometimes that's difficult when.
I know. I apologize. I'm back. It was quick. I want to say, I'm so glad you brought up the pen papers. The most interesting thing about it is he sits down for this interview and they're like, "Okay, let's do this." And he goes, "Wait, before we begin, do you have the pen papers?"
Right.
That's what he says to police. He goes, "Wait, but before we even start, do you have them?" And they're like, "No, we don't." And I want to say this too. I realize now, do you remember the body cam footage where Kevin is very angry at Sherry for taking journals out of the house? I think that's what Kevin thought she had taken, were these pen papers. We don't know if the police has them or if they're elsewhere, or if, Pam Bodger has them or whatever. But I thank you for bringing that up. Sorry if that was a repeat, but there was about 5 minutes where I couldn't hear. I'm back.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad you're back, because I'm so used to, playing off you and having this dialogue. Our show is basically a dialogue between us. So when you get cut off from audio, I'm sometimes I feel like a deer in the headlights. So I'm glad.
The other thing, I'm back. I'm back here. As people always say to us, by the way, I should stop interrupting him. It is true, admittedly, and he should not interrupt me. Sometimes it depends on who's feeling what at what time. But the truth is, I think we're married. We comfort one another even when we interrupt. So I apologize, everyone. It's our dance. But I do try not to interrupt him as much when I hear you guys yelling in comments. But before I let you start again, the other thing I want to point out with the pen papers is it also reminds me of Tim Ballard. Tim Ballard kept his visions and things that he saw and his blessings. So it's Daybell and their scriptures, and it's Tim Ballard, and it's just this major religious component of being called of God, which, by the way, go ahead.
Right. The commonality is this grandiosity about writing something so important. It's going to be scripture. It's going to be eternal. It's going to last forever. There's this desire, I think, among all these players. Chad Daybell's books became scripture later. Tim Ballard's notebooks were scripture. I think there's this desire for transcendence, this desire to write something that's going to matter so much that it'll be recognized by God and it'll be recognized for eternity. And so I think the underlying theme there is you have this tremendous, not just religiosity, but you have this tremendous grandiosity that's driving so much of this. And this grandiosity is, I think, up to a large degree about transcending mortality.
Yes.
And speaking of that, I'm going to start putting together some pieces from this evidence that we just received from this document dump. And hopefully that'll provide some insight into some of the motives and some of the hidden motives and some of the not so hidden motives, by the way, too. So, but let's play a clip this is something that we had talked about on a previous episode, but we had done an analysis of Jody Hildebrandt talking at the Eternal Core Conference in 2019.
Yes, we did.
And I want to play a bit of that again because that'll help us start making sense of what's going on here.
Great. And by the way, all of the videos I've played thus far are on our YouTube channel. You can find them there. Let's pull this up. So this is one of our first videos that we did in analyzing Jody Hildebrandt.
Anybody. I know thousands of people who have done this. My desire is to spread this throughout the whole entire world, to teach as many people, health professionals and health professionals who want to start empowering their clients, regardless of where your client has been.
We're going to go back a little bit, guys, because I messed that up. Here we go. 16.
And you are scheduled, as am I, to have hard, difficult experiences. And you are being asked by your maker to stay inside truth. If you will stay inside truth, you will not become ill. You just won't. I know there's some people in the audience who are like, I don't know about that. Try me out. You start living in truth. I don't know anybody who lives in truth that is emotionally and spiritually sick. I don't know anybody. I know thousands of people who have done this. My desire is to spread this throughout the whole entire world, to teach as many people and therapists and mental health professionals and health professionals who want to start empowering their clients, regardless of where your client has been. If they've had traumas or abuses, they can heal.
Is that good?
Okay. Yep, we're good.
It's so weird to see two of us. Look at us a few months ago. It's like a time capsule. Yeah. That's what I was trying to get rid of when I messed it up. Sorry, guys. So she wants to spread it to the entire world.
She says, quote, my desire is to spread this throughout the whole entire world. I think she said whole entire, but this
entire world.
This is important because this occurs in 2019. This is around the time that she meets Ruby Franke. Ruby Franke in 2019 has one of the biggest YouTube channels in the world. Ruby Franke in 2019 is making millions of dollars and has millions of subscribers on her YouTube channel. So one of the questions people ask is, why Ruby Franke? How did Ruby Franke get pulled into all of this? And I think, so when you hear Jody Hildebrandt saying basically she wants to achieve world domination with not only her personality, but her ideas. And when you hear about the pen papers and scripture and talking to God, I mean, so a picture starts to develop here clearly about Jody Hildebrandt's motivations. Jody Hildebrandt doesn't find Ruby Franke just to be a nice person that gets along, that she can get along well with and, you know, can help her develop her business. She finds Ruby Franke to be essentially, I think, an object that she can use. And she sees, I think, her platform as a platform that will help her achieve this goal of spreading her gospel, her views, her gospel, her ideas that's from connections, to quote her, to spread her ideas throughout the whole entire world. So you have a situation here where you have someone, Jody, who has a set of beliefs and ideas that are quite literal and quite religious. And you have someone, Jody, who has this desire for world domination. And roughly in 2019, early 2019, Ruby Franke reaches out to Jody for help with one of her children, who's a teenager having problems. And that's how they meet. So Kevin, in his interview, Kevin is going to help us understand a little bit more about what's going on here. So
thank you, Kevin. He does, man. This interview and his information is wild. Go ahead, John.
So just to provide some background here, in March 2021, Jody apparently has some sort of mental health crisis, and she ends up spending 6 weeks at a friend's house. This is in northern Utah. So she's at this friend's house. There's conflicting versions of what happened there, by the way. Jody later says, according to Kevin, that Jody claims she was kidnapped, whereas the friends, I won't mention their names, you guys can find this. The friends say essentially that Jody was suicidal and she needed help, and that simultaneous with being suicidal, she was essentially making advances towards the husband of the couple's home where they stayed. So the wife claims that Jody was being sexually provocative with her husband.
And this is the Hannahs, correct? Is this the
Hannahs? Yeah, the Hannahs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that lasts for 6 weeks. Jody claims that she's kidnapped, that she escapes. So she's very vulnerable, and she reaches out to Ruby for help. This is March 2021. She's feeling like she needs someone to be close to her, and she turns to Ruby. So in May of 2021, roughly, Kevin and Ruby visit Jody's home for the first time in southern Utah, in Kayenta, the infamous home we met with the safe room, and the home that's now for sale.
Beautiful, infamous home.
Yeah. And so Kevin, they're visiting, and according to Kevin, there's all these peculiar happenings, that there's noises in the basement. He says plates are flying around the kitchen. He says that he who's an engineer can't make sense of any of this. And Ruby was very concerned. Ruby felt like she could help. So simultaneous with that incident, the bishop in that particular ward in southern Utah was visiting every night, and, quote, he was casting out demons. He was trying to cast out demons from the home, or Jody. I'm not quite clear where the demons were, but apparently there were demons involved, and this bishop was trying to cast them out.
Bishop Galbraith was his name. Yes.
Okay. So that's occurring in August of 2021. Now, around that time, Ruby suggests that Jody move north and come live with the Franke family in their house. So Kevin's a little hesitant to agree to this offer, but Ruby really wants Jody to come north to their home and to stay with them and to be their guest, so that Ruby can help Jody with whatever these mental health issues seem to be. I don't think they're calling them mental health issues, by the way. That would be my interpretation.
Right.
But there's a couple of interesting things going on here. Number one, I think Jody probably potentially has deeper mental health issues than we're aware of. If the suicidal part is accurate, if Jody is in fact suicidal, which seems possible or reasonable. And the other thing I think that's going on is that Jody probably sees Ruby as a bit of a mark. I think that by Ruby becoming so invested in Jody, I think Jody sees Ruby as being particularly vulnerable at this time in her life, especially with this offer to head north and to live with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think since 2019, when Jody asserts that she wants world domination and she meets Ruby, I think she's been developing this relationship. But here, with these mental health crises and this opportunity to come live with Ruby, I think Jody probably senses this is a really unique moment. So let's listen to Kevin describe when Jody moves in. Kevin gives us a description of what starts happening in the home. So this is roughly 23:30-ish.
23:30th? Okay.
23:30, yeah.
Here we go. (23:30) Here I am, 23:22. Start there?
23, yeah, I think so. Should be fine.
Silence. While we wait, thank you to those who have liked and subscribed to this video. Or liked this video and subscribed. Thank you. Was there a moment of silence before it?
No, I don't think so. I think we might be having problems with the audio. So
let's see here.
Do you have the full audio?
I do, but it'd be much easier. I mean, it would be hard to pull it. Let's see. Let me go. I'm going to remove it and add it back again. Let's see. Does this one work?
That's the eternal core. That's not the. Is interesting.
Does that work?
Mm-hmm. No, which is yes, that works. I can hear it.
Okay, thank you everyone for sticking with us. I don't know why these wouldn't be working. This has never happened. We're so prepared, and then this happens.
Can you get the time codes?
I have the time codes.
Okay.
I don't think that's the issue, right? We don't have sound, babe. The time codes are okay. You know what? If our YouTube videos work, let me pull it up on YouTube. How about that?
Okay.
But the time code's not going to be the same. That's the problem. Because I edited our YouTube video I edited the silence out of our YouTube videos. So what part is it, babe?
It's my guess, if with editing, maybe 23 minutes, 22 minutes.
Okay.
It begins with Kevin saying that as soon as Jody was in the house, weird stuff started happening.
Okay. It really makes no sense. It's not working. So this is from our YouTube video. 23. Did you say 23 minutes or 22?
Try 22. I don't know. With edited, I don't have the right time codes.
What's your time code?
23:30.
Okay.
It was weird, and I hated it. And I became the resident exorcist.
Okay, just go back a little bit.
Title I came up with myself. I thought it was kind of
go back to like just a little bit.
crazy house. the moment she showed up in my house,
Okay.
just the weirdest crap started happening. Lights turning on and off, sounds of people walking in walls, and like sounds like footprints going up walls and across the ceiling, and like stuff floating around, and it was just, it was weird, and I hated it. And I became the resident exorcist. That was the title I came up with myself. I thought it was kind of funny, but it was my job to like go and give her blessings whenever she started to like go into a trance and go into possession, and which started to be a lot. And Ruby would go up and check on her. It started like every 4 hours at night, and then it moved every 2 hours at night, then it moved every hour at night, and then at some point Ruby said, you know what, I'm just going to start sleeping in there, and if I need you, I'll come down and get you. I'm like, that's kind of weird, but okay. And that was that. They started sleeping in the same bed, and then she started having like trances and stuff. I would say probably September, where she believed that she was going to heaven and seeing God and Jesus and talking with him. And she would get together with Pam Botcher. Ruby, Pam, and Jody would get together and do these interventions. That's what they call them. And so they just go up and lock themselves in a room for 4 or 5 hours, and then they'd come out and they'd all just be on cloud nine, and Ruby would share with me like she had this amazing vision, and I wrote it and recorded it all down, and we have a work to do from God, and you're part of it, and the bishop's part of it, and we're all part of bringing all this stuff to the world. So it was, and it continued like that until I wanted to move on with life. And I would call it dragging my heels. So that was around October. And Jody flipped out because during one intervention, Chad was in the backyard with a bunch of friends, and it was.
So I presume that part of what he's talking about are these so-called pen papers that they would literally lock themselves in a room and go into these trance states and have visions and perform interventions. I assume that had something to do with maybe exorcising demons. I'm trying to imagine what happened. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall during some of those 4-hour meetings, because those must have been pretty wild.
You and me both. Not everyone would wish that, but I think we'd be okay. Yeah. I think we would want to.
As painful as it might be, it would be fascinating. But so let's think about what Kevin just said. So there's a couple of things happening. One is you have these ecstatic religious experiences, which are drawing Ruby and Jody closer together, and apparently Pam Botcher. So we haven't heard much about Pam Botcher, but Pam Botcher's all over this, by the way. So,
we've heard a lot about Pam. I can tell you all about her. It's where the other 2 children were found. She's on body cam footage. Ruby apologizes to Pam during her sentencing. Jesse Hildebrandt, Jody's niece, stated that Pam is been Jody's best friend. Pam is the president of Connections, and when Kevin filed for restitution from Jody's house, he claimed that he might not be able to get the funds because they might be in Pam's name. And that is Pam. Go ahead.
So Pam is involved in these 4-hour meetings, sessions, whatever you want to call them. But one thing that's happening here, and perhaps the most important thing that's happening, is you're really solidifying the bond between Ruby and Jody during these moments, because they're spending a huge amount of time together. they're bonding around these ecstatic religious experiences. They're sharing and developing and strengthening and amplifying their belief systems, which are now starting to merge. So this becomes like Daybell again, in the sense that Lori and Chad, I don't know if they're having these kinds of ecstatic experiences, but they're doing something similar, and their belief systems are starting to merge. A lot of people have talked about the idea of like folie à deux with Lori and Chad Daybell. Oddly, I think you have maybe a similar dynamic here. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say folie à deux, but you have something similar, that you're really creating this intense bond here. And a point not to be missed is, and it's easy to overlook this, is Kevin is being evicted from the bedroom and Jody's moving in. So Kevin says that Ruby would go check on Jody every 4 hours, and every 2 hours, and every hour, and eventually they end up sleeping together. And that's a really important point, because now you have a situation where Kevin is essentially being evicted from their marriage and their bedroom, and Jody has literally replaced him. Jody is literally in the bed with Ruby Franke, and Kevin is now, apparently, poor guy, he's sleeping on the couch, and he doesn't have this family anymore that he really cherishes. And that, to me, this moment to me is so critical here, because I do believe now, looking at this evidence, that Jody really targeted Ruby for her platform and for world domination, to spread her word, to make a ton of money, whatever it is she was after. She goes through this mental health crisis. She uses that as a means of drawing Ruby in. She gets into these ecstatic religious experiences, and it works. She draws her in. She gets her committed to the cause, to connections, and she goes so far as to affect this transformation where Kevin Franke is now no longer in the bed with his wife, and he's sleeping on the couch or whatever, wherever, in the attic. I don't know, but he's now in a very real sense being tossed out of his own family, and Jody has taken his place.
And this is right around when Jody says at the Eternal Core Conference, this conference with sort of like-minded therapists bringing God back into therapy, preppers, and she states, I want to take this entire message to the world. And here is Ruby Franke.
And so it's not hard to imagine that Jody has set this whole plot in motion. I don't know how premeditated this is, but I believe some of it is. I think a lot of it is. But that doesn't let Ruby off the hook, in the sense that Ruby is a willing participant, that Ruby is keeping these pen papers, that Ruby believes they're scripture. Ruby is playing a really important role in all of this. She's not a side player. Ruby is not someone who, if you listen to just the sentencing and how supposedly remorseful she is, if you believe Ruby, she's saying that I met Jody, she did everything, I was the victim, and now I'm, separated from her, everything's back to normal, I'm good, I just have to figure it out. That's not the case. Right. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but
yeah, I have that video. She knew what she was doing.
Our time codes are going to be a little off, but go to roughly, I'm trying to guess here, 27:30-ish.
Okay, I'm going to try this one again really quickly. Nope, it just decided to go mute on us. Okay, 27:30-ish. Here we go. Again, I can't believe there are only over 6,000 people here, John. That's a rare thing. I hit a true crime. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and please hit like if this video resonates with you. 27:30, John. Did you suggest?
I'm trying to translate my time codes from the raw to the edited one you're using.
We would talk and that was hard.
What was your time
And it was
code?
during that time that
Original.
I really became, I would say, dependent upon Ruby. Like if she
This is
said
okay.
a kind word,
I think it's
to me,
close.
like, my whole day was made, right? And so that separation continued all the way up until the holidays, maybe the last week of December, first week of January, and then Ruby ended that separation. Jody went home like the second week of January. But by that time, like Ruby, Pam, and Jody were completely determined to do this work that they felt God had for them. And I thought it was crazy. Like I thought it was just batshit crazy. Like Ruby, you have a reputation, you have a multi-million-dollar business, you have a brand, and you are just giving it away. She wanted to legally like work with Jody's attorney to basically give Jody 8 passengers and become an employee of Connections. So basically the contract was Ruby gives Jody everything and Ruby gets nothing in return. Our manager, our YouTube manager at the time was like, red flags. Like, I don't know how to tell you, she is scamming you. Ruby fired him. And I was like, I believe our manager, I think he's right. And Ruby started threatening me with another separation. And just like, this isn't about money, this is about doing God's work. So we continued in that dynamic for the next 6 or 7 months until she went on a trip with Jody and Pam down to Arizona. And I think they, like, when I read her journal, she went into Mexico or something and bought drugs or something, like prescription drugs for the emergency kits. And when she came back from that trip, before she even brought the bags into the house, she pulled me in and said, I want to talk with you. And that's when she asked me to leave. And that was July 20th, 2022. My interactions with Jody at that point became one of Jody. I was still in the men's groups, but the dynamic changed. Instead of being like one of the top people that helped run groups and helped support, all of a sudden I felt like I got knocked to the bottom. And Jody was just piling on me every week in the men's groups. And the other men just do whatever Jody does. If Jody piles on somebody, they all pile on. If Jody praises somebody, they all praise. And so it really felt like a pack of dogs, and Jody was the alpha. And
Okay,
whenever
that's
she,
good.
sicked the dogs on, they would go.
She was like a pack of dogs, or it was like a pack of dogs.
Yeah. So,
And Jody was the alpha. That was very descriptive, Kevin.
but right, a couple of thoughts there. Number one, if you want to dig up motive here, it's pretty apparent. So Jody has the audacity to convince Ruby to essentially hand over 8 passengers to her completely. So Jody's lawyer goes to Kevin and says, look, Ruby wants you to give 8 passengers, or Ruby wants to give 8 passengers completely to Jody, everything, all the money, the brand, all the trademark, all of it, in exchange for Ruby becoming an employee because they want to do God's work. Now think about the fact that this is a channel with millions of subscribers making millions of dollars. And this has gotten to the point. So at this point, by the way, as Kevin reminds us, he's gotten kicked out of the house. They go to Mexico, they come back, they're doing peyote or whatever they're doing. It sounds like they're doing some hallucinogenic stuff.
I know, they get some drugs. Right.
They get some drugs because, of course,
Side note.
because in their faith, doing drugs is perfectly fine, right? So, but they go there, they do drugs. I guess it's okay when you're a prophet, you can do drugs.
Well,
but so
he calls them prescription, but prescription drugs.
Go to Mexico, come back. So they come back from Mexico. Kevin is now kicked. So Kevin has moved from the couch to apparently the street because he's now kicked out of the house and homeless. And now Ruby is telling him, if you want anything to do with me, you better we need to hand over 8 passengers to Jody because we're doing God's work and that's what she wants. And by the way, when you participate in connections, Jody's the alpha male and she leads a pack of dogs. And if you try to object or dissent or question her or challenge her in any way, this pack of dogs is going to attack you. So if you want to remain in connections, please do not challenge the alpha male. So here you have, so we're seeing this process unfold. It begins with Jody having a mental health crisis and being suicidal and vulnerable and drawing Ruby in to her web, and then subtly and slowly exerting complete control, maybe not complete because Ruby's a willing participant, but essentially exerting enough control to have Ruby hand over the keys to her kingdom and expect Kevin to go along with it. So now you're at a point. So this begins in March of 2021. Now we're into, what did he say? We're into early 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Now this transition is complete. Jody's in control of everything, of Ruby, to a lesser degree, Kevin. And Kevin is not only separated, but he's not living in the home. And he's obviously feeling somewhat despondent, understandably. But let's continue looking at let's continue this process. Let's go to, and again, my timestamps are going to be a little off from yours, but let's say roughly 3630. Mine's 37, but yours is going to be
3630. Okay. Oh, I have to pull it up. So is this it? No. This is it. 3630. 3630 was yours, John? Or
No, mine was 37.
okay.
I mean, torture and hell it was to live it was more than a month really, in complete isolation, believing that I was like evil and I mean manipulative and lying and selfish, and that I had abandoned my family and that I was more interested in my selfishness than my family.
And I think moving forward,
that's good.
You going through that is going to be
okay.
So we missed a little bit of the beginning, but the important point here is that Kevin talks about he says, quote, complete isolation. And that he's been called evil and manipulative and a liar and all these elements that because he's not going along with the program. And so this is important, by the way, because if you want to look at how people get indoctrinated or brainwashed or persuaded, one of the key steps is isolation. So one of the first things you want to do to really influence someone's thinking is to isolate them. Remove them from any social networks that can influence them or that can pull them back to some state of normalcy. And so Kevin is describing here, and by the way, Jody does this. This is exactly what she does with Ruby. So she isolates. That's the first thing she does with Ruby is she goes up to visit. Well, she has this mental health crisis. She reaches out to Ruby. She starts having these, I don't know what to call them, these ecstatic religious experiences for 4 or 5 hours at a time.
Trances, I don't know.
Trances, she visions, whatever these are. She gets closer to Ruby and pushes Kevin out. So now she's isolated Ruby. She's pushed Ruby's family or social network away, specifically Kevin, so that he can't really intervene. So isolation is one of the first and maybe the most important steps in terms of really developing, really indoctrinating or maybe even brainwashing someone.
Okay. Isolation first.
There's a book called Brainwashing: The Science of Thought Control by Kathleen Taylor. Kathleen Taylor used to be a neuroscience at cognitive neuroscience at the University of Oxford. So she's quite well versed in this field, and she wrote kind of a book for lay people that's excellent, and she talks about isolation. She talks about some of these steps as well. Not all of them. Some of these are steps I've added in, but it starts with isolation. So that's Kevin is now detailing that. So let's go to another step in this process. This is going to be roughly 38:30. My time code is 39, but we're not on the same page. So
okay. 38:30. Oh, where'd you go? Come back, John. Okay. Yours is 39. Okay, let's do.
First couple days of August, but
Just shortly before we made contact with you.
Yeah,
Or you made contact with us.
a month before. Okay. So for that whole month, my life was literally wake up, exercise, go to work, pretend everything's okay, come home, do connections like workbooks and read scriptures and try to strip selfishness out of my life. Like go to bed, wake up, repeat every day, boom, 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 boom. I mean, I was so upside down. And my plan was in 6 months, I get to reach back out to Jody again and she'll let me back in the group, and then I can prove, I don't know if I heard a door knock, but I don't know if I did.
Might be kids.
Might be.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is another step. Again, Kevin is giving us classic textbooks ways to indoctrinate people. So what does he say? He says that he has to read Connections workbooks and Connections scripture, and he has to read it every day repetitively. So it's like Groundhog Day in Connections.
If there's anything worse than Groundhog's Day, Connection style.
It's Groundhog. It's like the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray meets Connections. It's unthinkably bad. But anyway, that's Kevin Franke's life. He's getting up every day. He's reading Connection stuff. He's working out. He's coming home. He's reading Connection stuff. He's reading Connection scripture. He's basically trying to get back in Jody's good graces. And as he says at the end, in order to quote, prove himself. So this is another important step in indoctrination, and that is repetitive messaging. Mm-hmm. You isolate someone, and so there's the other thing that's an element here is threat. There's a lot of threat that if he doesn't follow these steps, he's going to lose his family. There's fear. If he doesn't follow these steps, he's going to lose his family. He's afraid. He's threatened. You have isolation, repetitive messaging. You have threat. You have fear, anxiety. These are all really critical components in terms of indoctrination. These, by the way, are components that you see in prisoners of war. So in a lot of war situations like Vietnam or the Korean War, these were techniques that the enemy used to try to change the beliefs of American soldiers. They isolated them from other soldiers. They would play repetitive messages every day over a loudspeaker about how America was evil and all this kind of stuff. That it was all an attempt to change their beliefs, to get them to side with the enemy. They would do this in under a lot of duress because they weren't sleeping, they weren't eating, they felt powerless. So there was fear, there was stress, there was threat. The threat of their lives was always at hand. So you have all these elements in play, and Kevin is laying them out for us. He's showing us Jody's playbook.
He is. This interview is fascinating.
Yeah, and also, by the way, this idea about calling him evil and manipulative and lying, all that's a projection. All of that is gaslighting in the sense that those are elements that Jody probably feels that she has in herself, but she would never acknowledge that. So what Jody does is, instead of acknowledging those elements of herself that are probably negative, she's projecting them on Kevin. She's telling her clients, you're evil, you're manipulative, you're a liar, when in fact those really apply to herself. So that's another element in her playbook. Isolation, repetitive messaging, projection of negative qualities, threat, stress, anxiety, and there's another element which we haven't talked about as much, but I'm trying to think.
While you think, I just have to say we have nearly 7,000 people on this live. It's incredible. Thank you everyone for sharing this with your friends. And thank you for your likes and for subscribing and being part of our original 144,000 subs. Jody thought she could get this to the world. We're just trying for the 144. So thank you.
Yeah. The other element, which isn't necessarily as much a part of indoctrination, but there's an element of dehumanization going on, in the sense that in order to pull this off, Jody really has to objectify Ruby, and Kevin both. She has to really kind of dehumanize them and see them. This is what she does with the children, by the way. She has to see them as objects that serve a purpose and not as human beings. And the dehumanization you also see with the children. She sees the children as objects. They're a means to an end. That if you see children as possessed by demons, or if you see a human being as possessed by demons, you're essentially dehumanizing them. So that is the other element that's going on here. That's not necessarily as much a part of indoctrination, but it goes with these, oftentimes, the POWs in war camps are clearly being dehumanized. And so I think you have the victims are being dehumanized. So you have that element in this process as well. And it shows up all over this case. It shows up all over Daybell too.
Whenever you have zombies and demons involved, you're dehumanizing when that's your answer to why somebody acting a certain way.
Right, exactly. And speaking of that, let's go to roughly, I'm translating the time codes here, 39:30-ish.
We
guess
just wanted, yeah.
The only questions I would have, and just going back, you said that she was having like these visions of like did we ever privy enough to understand or be told what those visions were? A couple of them. What were the two they should tell you about?
So like one of them, she was walking along the beach with Jesus, and Jesus challenged her to go walk on the water, and it was a whole lesson on walking on the water. Another, she would walk with Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, and she learned about, she had a pet lion in heaven named Charles. I don't know why I never forgot that name, but it was like this massive lion, and she got to ride the lion and learned that, you know, all about who she was and this pet lion and all. There was another one where there was a lot of satanic ones where when she would go into possession mode, she would talk in like different voices. It was really creepy. But the voices would say, she's ours, we're not letting go. She is Satan's bride. She's mine. I'm going to marry her. You know, so if she was faking it, she
that's good.
believed that she was.
I have to let Kevin know that I will never forget that name either. Charles the Lion. That will never leave my mind, that Jody's lion in heaven is named Charles. I even put it on the most important notes there on the thumbnail. The lion's name was Charles. Go ahead.
Is the lion, by the way, her spirit animal? Kind of sounds like it is.
It's her wannabe.
It's her
the king of the, you know, Prince Charles, I mean everything. Yeah, Charles the lion, and I'm gonna go ride Charles in heaven. Anyway, go ahead. Yes, there's a lot about Jody.
So this gets a little bit into the dehumanization element, I think, in terms of the most interesting part of what Kevin says there. Not just the fact that she's walking on water with Jesus, and she has this lion, this spirit lion who she rides named Charles, but the satanic visions, I think, are really fascinating to me in the sense that it really shows me. So if we don't take her at her word, if we see Satan as a metaphor for her inner life, for her mental state, for her psyche, which I would, obviously I'm a psychologist, but if Satan becomes an element of her psyche, let's say an object in her psyche, then what that means to me is that she's extremely conflicted. You have this turmoil in Jody, I think, that she's giving us here with that there's turmoil between whatever God represents to her and good and whatever Satan represents. There's kind of that classic battle between good and evil, but it's really raging in Jody. And she shows, like, the fact that a lot of her visions are satanic suggests that she's trying to put a lid on some of those negative, violent impulses. That the satanic part of her is a large part of her, and she doesn't really know how to contain it. And so one way she deals with that is when that overflows and she can't contain it, that's when she becomes violent. That's when she acts out towards the children. That's when she dehumanizes.
Oh, you're giving me an aha moment.
And so I what's important there, I think that's, again, Kevin is really helping us understand Jody, but this idea of being Satan's bride is fascinating. She's not just a conduit of Satan. She's Satan's bride. Think about that. That's more than a conduit of Satan. This is something that is deeply ingrained in Jody's psyche.
Okay.
This let's call it this negative or violent or aggressive impulse. These impulses are really, really deep in Jody, and she doesn't know how to contain them. She doesn't know how to deal with them. And I think a lot of it, by the way, a lot of her desire to develop a cult is to try to tame those instincts. If she can get other people to follow her and to believe some of this stuff, then she can normalize it. She can bring it under control to some degree. not fully.
I'm trying to do what I do best and dumb down what you just told us.
Okay.
But her cult is normalizing her darkness.
Yes, to some degree. Most cults, I would argue that while there's some benign cults, most cults are a function of leaders who are toxic and malevolent and have these negative impulses. There is some desire to harm other people. And Jody's no exception to that rule.
Wow. Okay. Mic drop. Go on.
42. Let's move on to 42 roughly. Again, our time codes are a little off, but by my calculations, 42 minutes. This is going to speak to Jody's mental health.
Person would just be this X for the connection. So it's like this Wizard of Oz thing going on. And that
She never showed her face.
kind of eerie.
She always covered herself.
Yeah.
Like even in the hottest of summer, she would wear these hoodies. She would smell so bad.
Yeah.
She would never bathe, but she was trying to hide her arms and stuff because apparently Ruby told me they were just like mutilated. And
So the other thing that I think it's important for them to know is during that whole time when you were out.
So she smelled, she covered herself, and it was like the Wizard of Oz. And she never showed her face.
You missed the beginning, but the detective actually says that. You could go back a little bit, but the detective actually makes that analogy. If you want to go back
to the Wizard of Oz. We heard the Wizard of Oz.
Oh, that was in there? I thought I just heard she never showed her face.
No, I heard the Wizard of Oz. That's why I said it. And I also realized now that the lion she rode was clearly the cowardly lion, truly. So look, guys, we're at 7,000 live, by the way. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Keep going, John. You're throwing down some truth bombs and mic drops here, helping us make sense of this.
So
they
Kevin
referred to her as the Wizard of Oz. Yes.
Kevin shares with us that Jody never showed her face, that she often wore hoodies in the summertime, and that she never bathed. So apparently she smelled horrendously, and her arms were mutilated, suggesting that she's a cutter. She would cut her arms. All of that, I think, is really fascinating for a number of reasons. Number one, so this particular moment with Kevin, I think, speaks more to mental health issues in terms of not showing her face would speak to me to shame. Shame is often associated with the face, with showing ourselves, with exposing ourselves in some way. And Jody doesn't want to be exposed. She's literally afraid to show her face. You know, the whole idea of saving face, that's about shame. And here you have a literal manifestation of Jody not, being afraid of showing her face and covering up her face all the time. That's fascinating. The other thing that it does, I think, for Jody is it develops a certain amount of mystery and authority, that if you're leading a cult and you're not showing your face and you're wearing hoodies in the middle of 115 degrees in the summer, which we live in Vegas and I wouldn't do that no matter how much shame I had. So I think you've got some shame here, and you've got this attempt also. If you're not willing to kind of deal with that shame or show your face, I think you have one benefit of that is to create this aura of mystery and authority around herself. Like, oh, there's the cult leader that we never see what she looks like. Who is she? She's larger than life, right? Kind of the Wizard of Oz analogy, that you can't see her. You never see the Wizard of Oz because he's behind the curtain. So it's kind of that idea too. So I think those two things often go together. The never bathing part, that's interesting to me. I mean, She lives in a home. She lives in the 10,000 square foot home with, I don't know how many she probably has what, 10 bathrooms in there. I mean,
Well,
it's not
I'll
from a
throw
lack of opportunity.
I'll throw a truth bomb. I'll throw some tea. I've been in the home.
Yes, you have.
I've been in the home and I've seen her showers, and there's probably like 10 shower heads per shower. They're probably some of the most grandiose, beautiful showers I've ever seen. So it is very interesting to think that she never showered. And yes, other people are referring the line to Aslan and the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I agree. Aslan would have loved these showers.
So the showering issue, you can't say obviously it's from a lack of opportunity. I mean, most normal people would find that kind of home to be extraordinary, and including ourselves, and that the opportunity to shower in a magnificent home like that would be amazing. But she doesn't use the showers, and so that to me is interesting, because usually when I see when somebody presents with those types of symptoms, I'm usually thinking depression. And again, I'm not diagnosing here, but I'm suggesting that somebody that with Jody's kind of wealth and home like she lives in, that not bathing probably has to do with mental health issues, and typically something like that would be related to depression, and which, by the way, would go along with during her mental health crisis, according to the Hannahs, that she was highly suicidal, very suicidal, and that would be consistent with depression. So there may very well be a kind of a deep-seated depression here that she's covering up. And that, by the way, that too would go along with shame. So I think that looking at this, that there very well could be a great deal of depression. And again, I think part of her acting out in the way she does is an attempt to avoid or skirt that depression.
People are asking me when I saw the home, by the way, there are questions coming. I'll say in the past couple of months. And I've been in the panic room and in the safe room, and I have been in a lot of the area. I don't think I'm quite ready to share everything, but I have been inside the home.
Maybe you spilled that tea too quickly.
Maybe. So I'm not going to say anything else.
Okay.
But I'll just say this, the feeling I had, it is, first off, it's a very beautiful home, and it is very chilling to be inside that home and to think about what took place there. And so as I saw all of the evidence drop, yes, last night and today, and I was going through everything to think to have been in there, it's been heartbreaking. That's probably why I let this tea drop a little bit, because it makes it all the more real. One of the most beautiful homes I've ever seen, and hell happened there. Children were tortured there. So,
right. It classic case of don't judge a book by its cover, right? You don't know what goes on behind the walls of even the most beautiful homes. We make assumptions that people that live in those types of homes have more opportunities and they're better off and maybe better mental health, and none of that is necessarily true.
yeah. I'll tell you a couple things. Here's some things you don't know about the home. She had an escape door outside of her walk-in closet. So that if something happened, they could escape through the ceiling onto the roof and get out. There were a lot of escape routes, and there were no video cameras and no security systems. Two kind of interesting things. There you go.
So that would suggest paranoia.
Paranoia and a lot of storage for prepping. Like just massive empty storage rooms, cement. I would say half the square footage was cement storage rooms. They were just very large with a ton of outlets. There you go. Here you go. Go ahead.
So the final piece of that description that Kevin just provided is that her arms are mutilated. And usually cutting cutting can be a function of depression as well, by the way. So a lot of times cutting is performed to try to allay some sense of anxiety. Believe it or not, people often cut, especially teenagers, because they're feeling anxious. And it's a way to cope with that anxiety. That sounds counterintuitive, but I think in the case of Jody, that it could be related to her depression, and it could suggest that there is some anxiety there as well. There could be a lot of, or maybe some, I don't know, some fear, some anxiety, some paranoia, clearly, that could all play a role in her self-mutilating behaviors.
Yeah, makes sense.
So the final piece of the Kevin audio interview I wanted to play to have you play was roughly, I'm taking a guess here, 4350. Let's try.
Okay.
And solve it, and how frustrating you feel. That's what my life felt like.
Sorry.
Ever had a dream where there's like a problem you're trying to solve, but you can't solve it, and how frustrating you feel? That's what my life felt like. And as I'm looking back and I'm realizing there was no solution. You either had Jody's approval or you didn't. I wasn't doing anything different than the other men in the group. But they got her approval, so they were praised and they were repenting and they were doing everything right. I, on the other hand, was manipulative and selfish and enabling and blah, 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 blah. And she became like the arbiter of truth, the arbiter of forgiveness, God's own mouthpiece. And it was just messed up.
Well, I'm glad that you're seeing clearly.
Okay.
So that's the last piece of the Kevin Franke interview I wanted to use. And the reason that's important is he's giving us another piece of this indoctrination puzzle. And that is that Jody is shaping behavior by praising behaviors that she wants to reward and by punishing behaviors that she's trying to diminish. And so it's a very simple behavioral technique, but on top of all the other elements we talked about, the isolation, the repetitive messaging, the stress, the fear, the anxiety, she's also implementing these really simple behavioral techniques, shaping behavior, it's operant conditioning. She's rewarding behavior that she wants. She's punishing behavior that she's trying to diminish. And that's occurring with Kevin. So Kevin feels very frustrated because he can't win. He's in these groups. He's trying his best, but he's not trying hard enough. So he's not getting praise from Jody. Jody's praising everyone that just goes along with the program. And that's very common in cults. And the other part of that statement by Kevin that I think is important is that he says that she became the arbiter of truth. She became God's mouthpiece. And so he's seen this grandiosity that on top of all these other elements, you can't run a cult unless you have a certain level of grandiosity. And so Jody has that grandiosity. Jody sees herself as not only writing scripture and having these visions and trances, but she literally sees herself as God's mouthpiece, according to Kevin. When she opens her mouth, it's the truth. And if you don't agree with her, then you're a demon or you can be condemned to hell. And so I think that's all of these. So Kevin he does a great job of laying out. He's not attempting to do this, by the way. This is my interpretation, but he does a great job of really laying out this process that Jody uses to indoctrinate the members of Connections. And she's not doing it with just Kevin. She's doing it with Ruby. She's probably doing some version of this with every single member of Connections. And if you want to know how Jody can afford to live in a $5 million house, then you just have to look at this process. when you go through this process of indoctrination, you have a situation where Ruby Franke is literally willing to hand over a multi-million-dollar brand to Jody Hildebrandt with nothing in exchange for it. If she asked the members of Connections to give her $1 million, they probably will. They will do anything for her. And the reason, again, going back to the POW camp analogy, when you indoctrinate soldiers over a period of years, they will almost do anything that the enemy asks them to do. And on using that analogy, by the way, R and E, the victims, I don't know if we're going to stay with that.
We're going to stay with R and E.
R was so emaciated, right, that he looked like he had been a POW. He looked like he had been in a concentration camp, and a lot of people made that analogy.
Yeah.
And
including
so
Brian Enton last night when I was on News Nation.
So I think it's a valid analogy, and it explains the steps that Kevin just laid out for us. Kevin's intention wasn't, by the way, to lay out the steps of indoctrination and into a cult, but he did, and so that's what he went through, and I believe that's probably the process that almost all the members of Connections went through, and all, by the way, for a cult leader who apparently doesn't shower. She wears a lot of hoodies, and her arms are mutilated. So I guess in spite of that her members were willing to go to all ends of the earth to support her.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people also are bringing up wondering if she was abused as a child. And yes, she wrote about that in her book. You Are Not Enough.
Talked about it. She's talked about it.
And she's talked about it. Yeah. So just to confirm what people are bringing up.
Yeah, she was molested as a child, and her father was a colonel in the Air Force who apparently was very strict and probably didn't praise her very much. And
her mother was also
she was bullied as a child, and she was very socially isolated. And so again, yes, right. You see her repeating a lot of those elements into adulthood.
She was also a beautiful singer, and at one point was a beauty queen, and has shared that she had an eating disorder. So yeah.
That was Jody or Rudy?
It was Ruby. Jody. I probably never showed you that. Our troublemaker Baker months ago found a newspaper article where she was a beauty queen in a pageant, and that she had a beautiful singing voice. And she stated during the Eternal Core Conference or during her connection videos with Ruby that she had an eating disorder. So those things we've learned.
So let's shift gears a little bit and look at the pertinent question that's on the table now is how much time are they going to get? How much time are they going to serve? And they were sentenced to consecutive. They were each convicted of 4 different counts of aggravated child abuse, convicted to between 1 to 15 years of consecutive sentences, meaning they don't run together. They run one after another, which means that they'll do between 4 to 60 years, 60 being the max, 4 being the minimum. And based upon what the prosecutor said, it definitely appears that Ruby has positioned herself well to get a much lesser sentence than Jody. I want to think about this issue of sentencing and risk, because I think that's what's relevant as we move forward. And so the question I always have to answer as a forensic psychologist is, what's the risk of letting someone go on probation or parole? What's the risk that they're going to reoffend? What's the risk that Jody and or Ruby would get out and commit a similar crime? And I think to really look at this question, and I can't fully answer that because I haven't assessed either of them. I haven't interviewed them. In order for me to really answer that question, I'd have to do hours of interviews and hours of testing, and I'd have to really kind of dig deep into their life histories. And so I can't I can't really answer that fully here, but I'm not going to really answer the question specific to them. I'm going to speculate more in terms of broad ideas. And one of those ideas has to do with belief. So, in fact, I think maybe the central idea has to do with belief. And this is going to take us back to David. This is going to take us back to almost every case. Most of the cases we've covered. And that is belief. And I think so we know essentially that Jody has the same belief system. In fact, can you play do you have the scripture?
Yeah, I have it right here. Let's see if it works. And if not, I have it on YouTube too. So all of these videos are on our YouTube. So I will play this. Let's see if the sound works on any of these attachments now. Nope. So I'm gonna actually add it again, see if it works. Hildebrandt. I have it. The children will rise up. It's the scripture of Jody. Is it playing now?
No.
It does not want to play. Okay. Well, I will go find the YouTube video. And while I do that, I'll show you guys. Nobody believed me that she was once a beauty queen. So, and I haven't shown John this either. So you guys can look at this while I pull up the YouTube video. John, tell him, here you go. That's Jody Hildebrandt in a pageant in the newspaper.
Okay. Was she, would that have been high school years or maybe a little bit after that, young adulthood?
I think it was young adulthood, and she was a singer.
Okay. That was her talent?
Yes. There you go.
Interesting.
Yeah. So back to this. Here it is. I have it right here.
Jody Hildebrandt.
What?
An inmate at
John?
Purgatory Correctional Facility. This call is subject to recording
John?
and monitoring. If
Yeah.
you don't,
What time?
Go to about, let's go to like a minute 30.
thank you
Okay.
for using Telmate.
Are you there?
Yep, there you are.
I just read that.
Yes.
I just wept. I mean, the spirit was like, he just said, "This is you."
Oh, I see it.
That was in Luke, and I read in Mark the same kind of thing, you know, because the Gospels they wrote similarly. So he said, "Now the brother shall betray the brother to death, and the father the son, like the father will betray the son, and the children shall rise up against their parents and shall cause them to be put to death." That statement right there is what's going on with me. The
Yeah.
children-
Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, no, you can stop. So let's just
The
talk.
children will rise up. The children will rise up against the parents, and the parents will be put to death. And that's exactly what's going on with her, she says.
Right. That's so there are 3 or 4 recordings in the documents where Jody essentially sits down with, I believe it's her attorney. I don't know who the person is that she's talking to. I'm guessing it might be her attorney, but I don't know. And anyway, what she spends 4 or 5 minutes on each one quoting scriptures and playing the victim. And I think this was a good example of that, of playing the victim, that the children, she didn't do anything wrong. This is all the children's fault. She started off by saying it was the children's fault. This, by the way, was in February. This is before her sentencing. So the question I want to ask is, has she changed her beliefs? Has she changed at all? And obviously with Jody, the answer is no, because she's making these kinds of statements to I don't know who, to someone in jail, and they're consistent with what she believed. They're consistent with what she currently believes. Nothing has changed for Jody. I think that's pretty clear.
Yes.
And so because of that, by the way, if someone, presumably if a forensic psychologist were to assess her risk and to see this type of behavior and to see her defiance in sentencing, to see the fact that she didn't make a statement, she didn't conduct an interview with probation for her pre-sentence investigation report, all of these elements would point to the fact that her risk is high to reoffend, and that at least at the moment it could change over time. If she's in prison for 10 years, that of course could change. But at the moment, I think you'd have to say that, I presume that someone would say that it appears that she would be still a pretty high risk, and that very little has changed. And as long as her belief system is in place and she believes that children are demons and that the children were responsible for her current predicament and they're going to rise up and kill the parents, then obviously there's problems there. But let's take a look at Ruby. So Jody doesn't seem to have budged too much. Let's take a look at Ruby. So Ruby made a comment about expressing remorse during her sentencing hearing, and that was released. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, let me pull that up. Here we go. I'll just pull this up from Twitter here. Do you guys see this? You don't even really need to see it. It's just audio. Can you see this, John?
I can't see it yet.
Oh. There's bye, John. Hello, John. All right. We'll play this.
I think in the interview, it's going to be apparent that she's mentally
let's start over.
ill. And did you see that Jody pled guilty today?
I did see that. Yes. Is that a relief for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big relief. It's a big relief. There would have been positive the other way too. Had she not pled guilty, there's enough evidence that she could have been convicted for life. But that would have been messy. It would have been really messy, and the kids would have. So, probably will. I don't think she's going to give them her history, but I think in the interview it's going to be apparent that she's mentally ill. And so that will affect how long someone, because they're looking, how repentant are you? How much responsibility are you taking? How are you aware that what you've done is wrong? And she's not. The only reason she pled is because she didn't want to do life. She knew I would testify. The other thing is, on my plea deal, when I come up for probation, the prosecuting attorney can, will often, if they think that you're a danger to society, will talk to the probationary board and or write them a letter saying, I think she needs to stay where she is. He's going to stay neutral and not write any letter when my probation comes up, which is a really...
There you go. When I heard that, I thought, wow. She's very thoughtful she's very thoughtful about why she wanted to show remorse. Very clear.
Well, there's a couple of elements to that. So that's a jail call that Ruby is making with, who's she talking to? An attorney? I don't know.
I'm not quite sure.
It doesn't matter. So
don't ask me things I don't know.
there's a couple of elements to that call that are really important. Number one, she recognizes that Jody is not repentant, to use her term. And she recognizes, too, that in order to even qualify for probation, she needs the prosecuting attorney to write a letter to the parole board, which is going on right now. That process is going on as we speak. A letter saying, essentially, that Ruby is remorseful or repentant and that she's a lower risk so that she should qualify for probation. So think about that for a minute. She's saying that she can play off of Jody's lack of remorse. If she expresses remorse herself, she will look good, she will look better in the eyes of the prosecutor, and she might even qualify for probation. She's not saying that she's remorseful. And this goes back to, go see our show on the sentencing. I said that I felt like she was being very manipulative, and now we understand why.
You did. You said that. You said that.
Now,
this is what you
now
said.
We understand. Now we understand her strategy. Her strategy was to look more remorseful because Jody was not being repentant. This was a strategy. Her whole Oscar speech thing about, I want to thank, the detectives, and I want to thank the people that arrested me, and because now I see the light. Like, she knew that. 2 weeks before her sentencing. 2 weeks before her sentencing hearing, she knew that she would look better because Jody looked so poorly. And she knew the prosecutor would buy that. And here's the part that amazes me. It worked, because the prosecutor came out on the steps of the courthouse afterwards and said, wow, Ruby's so remorseful. Can you believe it? I think she should get the minimum. The prosecutor said this. I think she should get the minimum sentence, which would be 4 years, which, as I've explained, in prison, there's something called good time. Usually you can cut your sentence by 60%. 60% of 4 years would put her at a little over 2 years. Ruby Franke can walk out of prison in 2 years, which for those for those of you who haven't done groups with violent offenders or sex offenders like myself, I've done groups with offenders for many, many years. They call 2 years, the term they use in my groups is they're serving wino time. Wino meaning the local drunk who ends up in an alley and he gets belligerent with the police officer when the police officer tries to move him or arrest him. He will typically, depending on his history, he'll typically get placed in jail or prison for a year or two, and they call that wino time, meaning like 2 years for somebody who seriously abused a child would be comparable to the wino in the alley. That is no harm to anyone, by the way. Society just doesn't know what to do with the wino. But I think it's remarkable that she could pull that off.
This is what you said. The question was, did Ruby feel remorse? This is what you said back in that video. And thank you to our moderators, Cece and Steph B and so many others that are sharing our playlist. We have 35 videos on this case now. You said that Jody did not make Ruby do this. Jody gave Ruby permission to do this.
Right. And now we're going to get into that. So let's. So
I have all our videos on YouTube, by the way. I got them all. I put myself on mute. All these sound things that aren't working for us, I've got them all. So tell me what's next.
Okay. So now let's take a look at Ruby's belief system. So we have Ruby on a jailhouse call essentially saying, I'm going to look really good next to Jody because Jody's not repentant. So whether I'm remorseful or not, I'm going to show remorse, and I'm going to thank everyone in the entire judicial system for helping me change my life, because I'll look really good. And that's what she did. That's a huge manipulation. Now we understand why she was doing that, because she was strategizing that before in a jailhouse call. It was on her mind. She understood how to play that game. So, all right, let's go to, this is a Ruby. This is in the document dump. This is number 45. This would be the, I don't know what you've called it, Children Full of Evil.
Yep, this is on our YouTube channel. I'll just play it straight from our YouTube channel since our video files aren't our friends tonight.
So go to roughly a minute or a minute 15.
Oh, I have it.
please.
It's an edited video, so I found the
Okay.
time. It's a different time for this one. Share this tab instead.
How long it would last. So I think I was prepared for this. I do feel strong. I feel calm. And you know what? They may. Adults have a really hard time understanding that children can be full of evil and what that takes to fight it. You've seen what it takes to fight evil. It's not the person you're fighting. And it can look like something it's not. And you've been there, you know that. And so I don't know any adults who are going to see the truth. So I'm calm about this, and I just pray that you'll hang in there.
Okay, you can pause it.
So she doesn't know any adults that are going to see the truth, because adults don't think that children are evil.
Because adults are blinded by children who are evil. So
Their cherub faces just fool us every time.
the important element of this particular jailhouse conversation is exactly what she says, that it's her belief that children are full of evil and that children are possessed by demons, and therefore they're unlikely to change, and adults won't understand that. I'm going to read something that reinforces this belief, that shows that this belief is probably ingrained in Ruby Franke. So also, as long as we're talking about this, it's important to mention that we have talked to a few sources that have confirmed that before Ruby Franke even met Jody Hildebrandt, she had very strong opinions about parenting. She had very strict disciplinary methods that I can't confirm whether she saw children as evil before Jody, but it certainly appears there were elements of that. So as I talked about during the sentencing show, this belief that children are evil doesn't just come from Jody. It doesn't just show up because she meets Jody. It becomes amplified. And again, the idea is that Jody gives Ruby permission to express what she really believes. And what she really believes is this: the children are evil. They're not to be trusted. They have to be disciplined harshly in order to get them to become compliant. This is a belief that Ruby Franke has. This did not change when she gave her Academy Award speech at sentencing. I'm going to read.
Thank you. It didn't.
Exactly. And that, we'll get to this in a minute, but when you have an entrenched belief that children are evil, that means that more than likely your risk to reoffend is going to be reasonably high unless you change that belief. It's the belief that's driving her behavior. It's the belief that's driving Jody's behavior. So this is from a journal entry. These are on our, you put them somewhere, right? The document dump.
Yeah, all of Ruby's journal entries, which is a whole other. Next hidden hour, I think we're delving deep into Ruby Franke. We haven't done that yet, but these are all because there is a lot and we just can't cover it all tonight. But we have all the journal entries on our Patreon account, patreon.com. And just for anyone that wants to join there with a monthly membership, we appreciate your support so much. And thank you to those that have gifted memberships tonight and all of your generosity tonight. Thank you. It doesn't go unnoticed. Go ahead, John. Yeah, this is from Ruby Franke's own journal.
So I read the journal, interesting. She talks about, it's interesting. How she sees the world, how she disciplines children. This was the most interesting portion of the journal that I could find. And I think this really speaks to her perceptions of her worldview, children, how she sees children, all of it. Anyway, so when I say I'm referring to the victim, the adolescent victim here. Stole water.
Not even barely, only 12.
12, yeah. So this whole thing, by the way, that I'm about to read it's triggered by the fact that R apparently stole water. Now, keep in mind that he's being asked to do hard manual and physical labor in 110-degree heat in July. He steals some water because, he's essentially completely dehydrated and suffering from heat stroke. But putting that aside, he's going to get disciplined for stealing water. This is how Ruby Franke handles it. This is from a journal entry of hers. I don't have the page number. I believe she wrote this in July when, again, it was well in the hundreds, and he's doing manual labor in the middle of the day. So if he doesn't steal water, he probably, suffers heat stroke, which could kill him anyway, but whatever. I mean, again, he's lucky to be alive, but thankfully he is. So here it is. Here's a journal entry. Quote, R stole water. He was angry and looked like he wanted to fist up. I put my hands on his shoulders and I told him I love him. I told him he has no idea what he's doing, but I do. I can help him. I told him, quote, give your demon friend a message for me. I will not rest. I will not stop. I will not leave. I will fight him until the day you die. I have the power of God, and he must obey. I beat Satan. I win. Then I looked in R's eyes, and with power and authority I commanded, quote, get out now, all in caps, quote, get out now, go. R immediately smiled, cried, slumped, Satan. R said, he's gone. He left. So, if you want to understand Ruby's beliefs, this passage is all you need to read. He steals water. She sees that his, quote, stealing water in 110-degree heat is demonic. She tells the demon in him that she won't rest until the demon's gone and that she has the power of God and he must obey. That she's essentially saying that R is Satan. She's going to win. And then she commands Satan to leave, and apparently Satan leaves, but obviously he doesn't leave because she's arrested a month and a half later for the abusive behaviors that occurred. So, but my point is, these types of beliefs run deep. Yeah. This type of belief, although it might be somewhat influenced by Jody, this type of belief does not disappear in 6 months.
Yeah.
The pen papers that we talked about earlier and all the visions, that doesn't just, you just don't change those beliefs overnight. And so if we're thinking about risk for Ruby and the possibility that the prosecutor, who apparently was snowed by her behavior, or I don't know how far I want to go, but the prosecutor definitely played into her narrative that she was a victim of Jody's. Now she's not. She's fine. He bought that. I think it's important for the parole board to understand that these beliefs are entrenched. They're deep. That if there's, so we've talked about this a little bit before, but there's different theories of beliefs. There's, in philosophy, there's something called stochastic voluntarism, which is that we have control over our beliefs. That we form our beliefs because we look at the world, we look at evidence, and we revise our beliefs if evidence suggests that our beliefs are wrong. There's another view called stochastic involuntarism. That's a view that was originally espoused by the Scottish philosopher David Hume. Hume believed that beliefs are essentially feelings, and that feelings are very hard. When we believe and feel together at the same time, we have very little control over them. So Hume used to think of beliefs as kind of being like hunger. You can manage your hunger, but you can't stop it. You can't control it. And so beliefs are like feelings in the sense that they're like hunger. And my point is that if you see beliefs as strongly being related to feelings, and anybody who lives in this country now has to think that, I would guess, beliefs are very hard to change because they're rooted in our emotions, and our emotions are not rational necessarily. Our emotions are not tied to cognition. They're not tied to evidence. They're not right. They're emotions. We lead with emotions, but we don't necessarily evaluate our emotions, acts, and evidence. And so my point is that I think that with Ruby Franke, you have a set of beliefs that are really entrenched. They're going to be hard to change. Even though she will tell you that she's changed them, or she'll tell you what you want to hear, it's unlikely she has. And so if you look at how beliefs develop, which are typically through the family, so through beliefs develop in our family cultures, and that, which by the way is another reason why beliefs are so emotional, because beliefs in many ways become survival, in the sense that if you don't believe what your family believes, you're risking being ostracized from your family, which is your very survival. You risk being kicked out of your family. So if your family is highly religious and you don't subscribe to those beliefs, you could be ostracized from your family. That's a very emotional issue. So when beliefs begin in our families and they're very emotional, and even if those beliefs are not true, we don't have a lot of incentive to question them. We don't have a lot of incentive to revise those beliefs. So we develop these beliefs which are very emotional. So in the case of Ruby, her family culture was extremely religious. She develops a set of very religious beliefs and ideas about the world. Strict discipline for children is part of those beliefs, I'm sure. And then she goes out into the world. As she gets older, she goes out into the world. She finds peer networks and social networks that essentially reinforce those same beliefs. So she never challenges those beliefs. There's no real openness to revision of these beliefs because she's not being rewarded for that. So there's a lot of closed-mindedness going on with her. And my guess is that there's a lot of confirmation bias here too, in the sense that not only is she finding groups that agree with her and confirm her beliefs, but everywhere she looks in the world, she's finding evidence to confirm her beliefs and not evidence that goes against them, not evidence to disconfirm them. So the problem, what I'm trying to say in short, is that I'm very suspicious of the fact that even though Ruby Franke gave a very remorseful statement and thanked everyone in court, I'm very suspicious of the fact that her beliefs, she would argue, I guess, that her beliefs have changed. I would argue that they probably haven't. I'm suspicious of the fact that she's claiming her beliefs are changed. I don't think they've changed. I think that's going to take a lot of work. That's probably going to take years to effect. As someone who's worked with offenders and a lot of their beliefs. So a lot of sex offenders and violent offenders have the belief that they're entitled to harm people. That seems like a simple belief, but it takes years. It takes years and years to overcome that belief. And until an offender can start to believe that they're entitled to harm other human beings, they're going to be a risk to the community.
Yes. Yeah. A couple things to point out. Someone said in her journals, she didn't say to Russell, she didn't say to R, until the day I die. She said, until the day you die. Parents usually die before their children. This is very frightening too. It does show something very frightening. And the other thing I want to point out too, because I've been going through all of the evidence, the journal entries, she kept daily journals about how evil the victims were, how evil the children were. And a lot of the time, Jody was out of town. That's one thing we learned through reading her journals, that Jody would leave for days to go look at property in Arizona where they were going to buy a compound, to go and visit with LDS leadership in Salt Lake City or other places. Ruby was doing this completely alone, without Ruby in the house, without Jody in the house.
Right. And it gets back to the pen papers that we began with tonight. The pen papers being all of these entries that Ruby is making into some special, not the journals we have, but some journals that haven't been discovered yet or found, that she believes those are scriptures, that Ruby's a willing participant in making those entries, and she's deeply invested in them. She believes in them. And a lot of those beliefs are similar to the belief that children are evil and that children are demonic and need to be punished harshly.
I'm slowing down chat per request of people. We do have one more, John. I want to remind you, I do have one more Jody Hildebrandt soundbite if you want it, but I'm going to put this on mute and slow down chat for a second.
Yeah, I think we're okay on that. I think, yeah. Okay. If it shows how aligned they are. If you want to play that Jody message, I think it's interesting. You can play the whole thing. It's short, but I think it shows how aligned Ruby and Jody are on their beliefs. So yeah, why don't you go ahead and play it?
Nobody wants
Oh,
the
yeah.
truth. Nobody wants the truth. Nobody wants the truth because these kids, I told Doug, I woke up, the spirit told me, it's all the devil. I mean, you've seen him. I mean, I've known you, for 5 years? You've watched him come at me, come at me, come at me, come at me.
Mm-hmm.
And you're exactly right, because he knows I know what he's doing. And he uses these kids. And he uses all of us as the adults, the parents that don't hold the kids accountable. So now it's abusive to make a kid sleep on the floor. It's abusive, or it's abusive to, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Can't even raise your kids anymore.
So Jody doesn't say that children are full of evil, but she says it's all in the devil. And
correct.
And having a child sleep on the floor, by the way, Jody, is quite different than throwing a child into a cactus or
making them sleep outside without bedding,
or not feeding a child, or putting duct tape on their ankles until the duct tape cuts to the bone. That's not quite the same as having a child sleep on the floor. So,
or starving them, right?
That's right. All of the above. There's so many. So it's not analogous, Jody. Sorry. So they do.
Go ahead.
They clearly have the same belief about children. They see children as full of evil. They see children as demonic. That's what they share in common. My guess is they probably shared those beliefs. Ruby probably had some version of that belief before Jody. Jody just amplified it and enabled that belief. So again, if you're looking at sentencing here and you're going to give Ruby the minimum sentence and you're going to give Jody something closer to the maximum sentence, I don't see how that decision can be made in a rational way. Especially after looking at this evidence and looking at the document dump, I have really serious questions about whether Ruby has changed at all. And also just because she gets into the court and is remorseful doesn't mean that she wasn't an equal or nearly an equal participant in a lot of these behaviors and a lot of this cruelty and a lot of the neglect, a lot of the issues that were going on with the children. She's just lucky that the children survived.
I know. They were close to not surviving. And if they had bought that property in Arizona, and they had left, I don't think they would have ever made it. It's heartbreaking to see those photos. And we're choosing not to share the photos. If anybody wants to see some of the photos, trigger warning, you can go. It's also on our channel. Brian Enton and I went live on Banfield last night on News Nation, and I have that clip also on our YouTube channel, and we show the photos there.
Yeah, we don't want to show them tonight, though. It's very hard to look at, and I don't, so. And thinking about this issue also, there's psychologists. So I guess I want to try to wrap up here. I guess we've been at this 2 hours. Psychologists talk about something called naive realism, and naive realism it means that most of us have this perception that our view of the world is the correct one, and we believe that because we don't necessarily expend the effort or take the time to challenge our beliefs or to learn new information or to get outside of our social networks. And so most of us look at the world and naively we think that our perception of the world is the most accurate one. Psychologists sometimes call this the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is similar. Dunning-Kruger means that we think we're experts on our view of the world because we essentially don't know other views of the world, and we don't challenge those views, and we don't take the time. If we're learning about a particular subject, we don't take the time necessarily to learn as much as we can about that subject. So we think that if we do a Google search and learn a few things, that we know everything there is to know about whatever that subject is. And typically we don't. So the reason I bring up naive realism is because I'm going to end with a quote here from the Bhagavad Gita, which is a well-known Hindu text scripture from 500 BC, well before Christianity. And I chose this because I'm not even sure. When I think about like Jody, Hildebrandt, and Ruby Franke, I'm not even sure they know what Hinduism is.
No.
I'm not even sure they know what Buddhism is, right? Like this idea of naive realism suggests that they're so rooted in this narrow, reductive view of the world and specifically Christianity that they can't see outside of that. And so the reason why you have this view of children as evil and demonic is because you're caught in this naive realism. You're caught in this worldview that you can't escape. And so I'm ending with this quote because it's a Hindu quote from a very famous Hindu book. I read this book years ago, but it's not been recently. It's a fascinating book, by the way. It has a lot of wisdom, but it's completely pertinent to the questions we're asking tonight, the quote, and it's completely pertinent to this issue of risk and belief. And so the quote is from the Bhagavad Gita. The quote is, quote, "Man is made by his belief. As he believes, so he is." And if I substitute Jody and Ruby for man, Jody and Ruby are made by their beliefs. As they believe, so they are. I think they believe the same things. I think that means that their risks are still significant. I hope that the parole board considers all the evidence when they make their decision, and they're not swayed by one moment, one 10-minute speech in a courtroom that was clearly scripted, staged, rehearsed, strategized, right? I don't know. You know, my job, as I say in court, my job is not to determine punishment. My job, punishment to do with the past. Most of my job as a forensic psychologist is to try to predict the future, is to try to predict reoffense in the future. And so I don't know. I can't say that I know what a fair sentence would be. I'll leave that to our viewers, and I'll leave it to the parole board. But I do believe that the minimum, if there's going to be a huge disparity in sentences, I don't think that's going to be fair. But that's just my opinion.
Thank you, babe. As Steph B has stated, if you have a question tonight, leave it in the comment section. We had some excellent questions tonight. Lolo, like yours is one of the excellent ones. I have 70 starred questions. Please leave them in the comments of this video. John and I are going to continue this conversation next week, unless there's some massive breaking news. But next week is the last week we will be doing a hidden hour that isn't Daybell related while the Chad Daybell trial is going. So leave your questions in the comments, and John and I will be reading them all, and we will be addressing so much more, because this document dump is endless, and what we have to say is endless. Babe, thank you so much. Thank you to this incredible audience we've had tonight. We have nearly 8,000 people watching with us live. Please consider subscribing to our channel. Please consider, again, if this video resonated with you, please consider liking it. It helps us to grow and to be seen, and we want to be here for a long time. We value this true crime community and what this community, and then our hidden gem community, and what we bring. So thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, and have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.